Hello, I'm Alpaca Sensei. Welcome to a class about the differences between wa and ga in Japanese. Are you ready? Good luck. There are 4 chapters. Firstly, we will see mandatory ga, then mandatory wa, and then meanings of wa, and finally meanings of ga. So first of all, we are gonna see mandatory ga. Mandatory ga can be used without thinking about the meaning. You must use it for the grammatical reason. So, for the next 3 conditions, you must use ga. Firstly, after the interrogative word as the subject and it is answer. Secondly, after the subject in the relative clause. Thirdly, when we combine ga and another particle. So let's start. So firstly, we'll see ga after the interrogative word as a subject and its answer. Do you know some interrogative words in Japanese? As you can see on the display, there are, for example, it's, nani, doko, ikura. But there is a problem. There are some interrogative words which cannot be the subject and some which can be the subject. So here is a list of the interrogative words which cannot be the subject like do, どうやって、なぜ、どうして。So, globally saying, the interrogative words of the method or the way, and that of the reason cannot be the subject in Japanese. And this is a list of the interrogative words which can be the subject. If you have time, pause the video and see it. We're gonna see some examples using these words very soon. So now you see some examples. We need ga after the interrogative word as a subject and its answer. If you want, pause the video and read them a bit. And other examples. I hope the translation of each Japanese phrase is good for you to understand the meaning. Like before, pause the video and take a time to read a bit. And yes, there still are more. Don't worry even if you can't understand the phrase or its grammar. The important thing is that you need ga after the interrogative word as a subject and its answer. Pause the video and take a look at the phrases. Did you read it? That's too much, but this is the last page. So take a look a bit. How was that? Did you understand this rule? So, now we are gonna see the mandatory ga after the subject in the relative clause. Do you know what is the relative clause? In short, that is the phrase which decorates a noun. For example, in English, we say, the chocolates that I ate yesterday, blah 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 blah. And the phrase, I ate yesterday, decorates a noun, the chocolate, by using that. In Japanese, do you remember how to do it? To make a relative clause in Japanese, we need to do 2 things. Firstly, wa at the position of the subject must become ga. Secondly, the form of the verb must be neutral. So, as you can see, for example, 母は買います becomes 母が買う. And we add it before the noun. Well, try to combine a noun, ラーメン and the phrase 母はスーパーで買いました 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That becomes 母がスーパーで買ったラーメン。Is it clear? But how can we understand the following phrase like this? Maybe you have already seen something like that before. 私は母がスーパーで買ったラーメンを食べました。There is は after 私。But we must change は to が。No? Why は? In fact, this は with 私 relates 食べました the verb. So it doesn't relate to the noun. That's why this は doesn't need to become が。And that's also why this は can have both は and が。And as you can see, it can move in front of the verb too. Well, is it clear? So now we will see the last mandatory が。We use it when we want to combine the meaning of が and that of another particle. So, because we combine が and another particle, logically we need が. And this is a list of the particles that we can combine with が. But pay attention, because the type of the verb that we can use varies depending on the particles. So, with the particle からまで, we can use both general verbs and the verb です. But with the particle で、え、に and と, we can only use the verb です. Be careful, this と is the one which has the meaning of the relation of co-agent. And this is the list of particles which cannot combine with が. So, お、より、わ、や、も、と. And this と is the one which has the meaning of connecting words or of citation. So let's see some examples. As we know, when we combine から or まで with が, we can use both general verbs and the verb です. So, for example, with general verbs, we can make phrases like お酒は20歳からが飲めますよ。お隣さんまでが来た。And with the verb です, we can make phrases like お酒は20歳からがいいです。お隣さんまでがいいです。It's not important if we don't understand these Japanese phrases. The importance is to know that we can combine が and another particle under the condition of the choice of the type of the verb. And these are example phrases using the particle で、え、に、と with が. When these particles are combined with が, we can only use the verb です. Pause the video and take a look at them for a while. And other examples with particle に and と. Is it clear? And the list of the impossible particles to combine with が. Pay attention, especially to the particle と. Depending on the meaning, と can combine with が, as we have seen. So we have seen 3 conditions for the mandatory が. Firstly, it's about が after the interrogative word as a subject and its answer. So, for example, いつがいいですか? 今がいいです。Secondly, after the subject in the relative clause. So, for example, if we combine a phrase 母は買いました and the noun ラーメン it becomes 母が買ったラーメン and finally when we combine が and another particle so for example お酒は20歳からがいいです and now we will see mandatory wa there's only one condition for the mandatory wa it's when we combine wa and another particle so this is a list of the particles which we can combine with wa so からまででえによりと They can have both the general verbs and the verb です。Here is a list of the impossible particles to combine with wa. Well, many examples once again. But take a look a bit. And always examples. Do you remember the difference of meaning of the particle de? If not, take a look at the examples and remember it. And now you need to pay attention a lot. When the particle to is combined with wa, its meaning has to be for the citation or for the co-agent. This is different to the combination of to and ga. We will see about it later. And once again, always examples, this time with e and ni. Do you remember the different nuance between ni and e? In short, when we use ni, we are more determined than when we use e. And the last one, the particle yori with wa. Pay attention. We can combine yori with wa, but not with ga. And this is a list of the impossible particles to combine with wa. These are o, ga, ya, mo, to. Pay attention, this to, this time, has a meaning of connecting words. And now you need to pay 100% attention. Pause the video and check them carefully. So this is a list of the comparison of the particles which can and cannot combine with wa and ga. Wa is more simpler than ga regarding the combination with other particles. So pay attention to three things. Firstly, possible verbs. Concerning ga, you need to distinguish well the types of the verbs, since it varies depending on the used particle. And then the particle to. In the two cases of wa and ga, we can't use to when it has the meaning of connecting words. But when it has the meaning of the citation, it can be only combined with wa. So we have seen the mandatory wa when it's combined with another particle. For example, お酒は20歳からは飲めますよ。お隣さんまでは来た。Is it clear? Did you get the rule? Yes. Finally we arrived here. From here, we are gonna see the meaning of wa and ga. And first of all, we will see the meanings of wa. Are you ready? Let's start. Oh my Buddha and 神様. There are so many. No, there are only 7. Lucky 7. So there are theme, judgment, declaration, explanation, comparison, minimum, call. Don't worry, we will see them one by one. But wait a second. Since there are 7 meanings, How can we determine one? In fact, we need conversation or context to determine the meaning. As a result, when there is one phrase with wa, it's normal that we don't know the exact meaning. So firstly, theme. When I say theme, it means something that we want to talk about with somebody. For example, do you understand this phrase? マイクさんはトイレです。Does it mean that Mike is a toilet? Is he an object? Of course no. Maybe. To understand this phrase, we need a context. So let's see the conversation. マイクさんどこですか? マイクさんはトイレです。Here, the context in which person A looks for Mike gives a meaning to the phrase of person B, マイクさんは. What kind of meaning? It's a place where Mike is now, and that is what person B wants to talk with person A. Therefore, it's wa of theme. Another example, at a restaurant. 私は寿司を食べます。B さんは？じゃあ私はラーメン。The context which we find here is that person A wants to know what person B will order. So, 私は of the phrase of person B means the dish that the person B will order, and that is the theme that person B wants to talk about with person A. And pay attention, this wa of the theme can be at the other position of the phrase. For example, we can say, 今日日本料理を作ります。日本料理は作るのが簡単ですか? Here, the verb 作ります generally demands the particle o. But when 日本料理 becomes a theme, we can use wa instead of o. So let's see the second one, wa of judgment. The judgment here means the replies to these questions like どうですか? 何ですか? 誰ですか? For example, 漢字どうですか? 漢字は難しいです。Here, we can also say that 漢字 is easy, but the judgment of person B is difficult. Another example, 犯人誰ですか? 犯人はあなたです。This sentence shows the judgment clearly, no? This one, これ何ですか? これは毒です。This type of phrase can be found very often in detective novels or detective manga, like Detective Conan. Is it clear? Did you get it? The third, wa of declaration. By declaration, I like to say to transmit his or her will to other people. For example, at a wedding ceremony, we say, 私はケイトさんを死ぬまで愛することを誓います。The fourth, wa of explanation. I use this word for the replies to this question, like 何ですか? どんなほにゃにゃですか? For example, これ何ですか? これはマカロンです。マカロンはフランスのお菓子です。By the way, what do you think of this phrase? マイクさんは親切な人です。Is this phrase for the judgment or the explanation? In fact, the judgment is our thought. Therefore, is the thought of someone who speaks. But the explanation is to transmit something to other people. So if I think and say simply, マイクさんは親切です。It's one of the judgment. But if you want to transmit, マイクさんは親切です。This one is of the explanation. Sometimes the meanings are mixed together. The fifth, the comparison. The comparison is to compare more than two things or facts. For example, チョコレートは好きです。キャンディーは嫌いです。By this, we compare the chocolate and the candy. So, what is used? Is it clear? Me, I prefer chocolate to candies. How about you? The sixth, the minimum. By minimum, I want to say the feeling that we need at least someone or something. For example, 社長は会社に来てください。問題が起きました。In this phrase, we say 社長は because when some problem happened at this company, at least if the boss comes, we can resolve it. But if a new employee comes, what can he or she do? Pay attention, this one on minimum can be at other positions in the phrase. For example, we say 私は水を飲みたいです。Because the verb 飲みます generally means the particle o. But when we exchange this o with wa of minimum and say 私は水は飲みたいです with wa of minimum, now this phrase has a meaning I like to drink at least water. Is it clear? Congratulations, the last one, wa of call. By call, I like to say to call the name of the interlocutor to start a conversation. In Japanese, this wa is used if and only if the subject and the name of the interlocutor is the same. Do you know it? In Japanese, it's more normal to use the last name or the first name to speak to someone than using a pronoun like you in English. So, 君 あなた in Japanese. For example, when person A speaks to Mike like マイクさんはラーメンが好きですか? Mike replies like はい好きです because マイクさんは is used for calling Mike to start a conversation. But when person A speaks to person B with the same phrase マイクさんはラーメンが好きですか? Person B, so who is not Mike, replies 好きだと思いますよ Here, person A asks a question about Mike to person B by using マイクさんは Is it clear? Well, we saw 7 meanings of wa. Firstly, the theme like 私は寿司を食べます B さんはじゃあ私はラーメン And then judgment like これ何ですか? これは毒です Then the declaration like 私はケイトさんを死ぬまで愛することを誓います And then the explanation like これ何ですか? これはマカロンですマカロンはフランスのお菓子です。And then comparison like チョコレートは好きです。キャンディーは嫌いです。Then the minimum like 社長は会社に来てください。問題が起きました。And finally the call like マイクさんはラーメンが好きですか? はい、好きです。Is it clear? And now the last chapter, the meaning of ga. There are 4 meanings that we are gonna see about ga. Firstly, the phenomenon, then the exclusiveness, and next, the choice, and finally, the responsibility of the subject. But before starting, we need to remember how we can determine a meaning out of 4. Like the particle wa, it's the conversation or the context, which let us choose its meaning. So if there's only one phrase with ga, we can't determine an exact meaning. So first of all, we are gonna see ga of the phenomenon. By phenomenon, I'd like to say the feeling of the existence in front of us, the action in front of us, and the thoughts that something really takes place. In short, when we talk about something that we can touch, or almost touch, or the very concrete thoughts, ga is rather used than wa. For example, listen to this phrase, 鳥が飛びました. Here, we use ga because the bird actually flew in front of us. But if we say, 鳥は飛びました, here we talk about an image in our head. Is it okay? So the second, ga of the exclusiveness. The exclusiveness here means the feeling that something or someone is not like the others. For example, ジャックさんが好きです. Here we can think like, not Mike, not Lee, not Sensei, but it's Jack that I love. But if we say, ジャックさんは好きです, here we don't have the meaning of the exclusiveness, and the meaning of wa can be that of judgment, comparison, minimum. Another example. At a restaurant, Mr. Yamada asks to a person A, 注文決まりました?私がラーメン, B さんがカレーです. Well, person A sends a message with ga, that it's not person B but me who will order the ramen. And it's not me, but person B who will order the curry rice. But if we say, 注文決まりました?私はラーメン、B さんはカレーです. Here, it might be wa of comparison. Is it clear? Can we continue? The third, ga of the choice. The choice here means to choose one after a comparison. For example, イタリアより日本の方が長いです. We use ga here because firstly we compared Japan and Italy about the length, and then we choose Japan. We can't say like イタリアより日本の方は長いです. But we can say without saying イタリアより like 日本の方は長いです. イタリアの方は長くないです. Because when we use より, the phrase becomes that of the choice, so we need ga. But without saying より and with wa, the phrase becomes that of comparison or other wa options. Is it clear? And the last one, ga of the responsibility of the subject. Well, the responsibility of the subject here means the feeling that the person or the thing must do something, that the person or the thing has done something. For example, listen to this phrase, マイクさんがお昼ご飯を作ります. Here, with ga, there is a responsibility of the subject, so Mike is responsible for the making lunch. But if we say, マイクさんはお昼ご飯を作ります, it means one of same or minimum or of comparison. Without context, we don't know. Is it clear? So we saw 4 meanings of ga Firstly, が of the phenomenon like 鳥が飛びました。Then, が of exclusiveness like ジャックさんが好きです。And then, が of the choice like イタリアより日本の方が長いです。And finally, が of the responsibility of the subject like マイクさんがお昼ご飯を作ります。Congratulations! お疲れ様でした。It's not easy to understand everything now, and in fact, there are more things to see, like what to do when there are more than two wa or ga in one phrase that we saw some in this video, or what to do when there are more than two phrases connected by a conjunction. I'm making videos for that, so if you are interested in it, please click like and subscribe to this channel. See you soon. またね。